confidence in AI doesn't automatically translate into ROI. AI systems get more autonomous, data integrity shifts from a nice to have to a real business risk. Governance is working where it exists. So organizations that have a governance program in place are measurably ahead.
Welcome to the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast, where we explore the latest in enterprise trends, tech, and strategy with the top leaders shaping the future.
Welcome to Enterprise Unlocked. I'm your host, Radhika Mukherjee, Editor-in-Chief of Enterprise Talk. Our guest today is Dave Shuman, Chief Data Officer of Precisely. Dave leads the team responsible for establishing advanced data governance, modeling, and analytical capabilities for Precisely. He has over 20 years of experience in executive-level leadership roles in IT, data, and operations. Dave, welcome to the show.
Radhika, thank you for having me on.
Great to have you here. Let's dive right in. So, we are here to discuss, among other things, a report released by Precisely and Drexel University. So, let's start with the report, Dave.
Absolutely. What we're seeing in the research is very interesting. It's that confidence in AI doesn't automatically translate into ROI. A lot of organizations are moving fast, which is really great, but they're doing it without the data foundations they actually need to scale AI safely. And so there's this disconnect, and we're calling it the agentic AI data integrity gap. And as AI systems get more autonomous, data integrity shifts from a nice to have to a real business risk, and it's become foundational, and we see it in the survey results.
Okay, so what were the key findings of the 2026 State of Data Integrity and AI Readiness report?
We found three headline tensions that really define this year's research. The first is what we call the confidence reality gap. And I'm about to go into a ton of statistics, and I apologize in advance for them, but they're really interesting in the data. So about 87% of the leaders told us they've got the infrastructure, the skills, the data readiness for AI. But then 42% also said those exact same things are their biggest obstacles. And both things are true at the same time. It's not a contradiction, it's a measurement problem. The biggest disconnect comes from measuring readiness at the wrong altitude. Many organizations judge maturity based on whether they bought the tools or deployed a platform. And they're kind of flexing, they're representing themselves externally as being AI ready. But real readiness lives deep in the operational foundation. It's metadata, it's lineage, lifecycle management, and consistent ownership. And when those elements are weak, everything above them becomes fragile. So if the first thing we see in there is the confidence reality gap, the second is a measurement gap. 71% say their AI initiatives align to their business goals, but then only 31% actually have metrics tied to KPIs. And that's the gap between aspiration and operational truth, where confidence begins to drift away from reality. Until organizations build durability beneath the surface, their perceived readiness will continue to outpace what they can actually sustain. And the third is governance as a differentiator. Organizations with a real data strategy and a governance program, 71% report high trust in their data. And without it, that drops to 50%. The ones with governance already in place expect positive ROI from AI in under a year. So 3 key findings out of the report.
That's amazing. But what I'm drawing from it is just get the basics right. That seems to be the key.
You build a AI house on a solid foundation. If you don't have that foundation, you're just building a showpiece and you're not building durable capabilities for the organization.
Yeah. So long-term growth is what really needs to be looked at.
Yes.
So, tell me, what were the most surprising findings from the report?
Honestly, the thing that surprised me the most was that optimism and concern are both valid at the same time. And again, once you understand what people are actually measuring, it makes total sense. Leaders aren't wrong to feel confident. They have the tools, the contractual relationships, the AI platforms, but they're evaluating readiness at the wrong altitude. They're looking at the platform and they say, do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the large language model access? But real readiness lives one floor down, and it's about lineage and metadata and lifecycle management and governance, and that's where we're finding the cracks. Here's a perfect example. 86% of the respondents said they had the skills for AI, but 41% also cite skills as the top obstacle. So again, both things are true. Building the model is the visible part of the work. Sustaining it, and what does that mean? Refreshing the data, monitoring the compute, versioning the models, maintaining your pipelines, run observability tooling. That's where the real cost lives. And durable AI is an ongoing commitment, not a launch event.
True, true. What about what gives you hope? What were the most optimistic findings from the report?
The optimistic news? Governance is working where it exists. So organizations that have a governance program in place are measurably ahead. 71% report high trust in their data. That's versus 50% without governance. They also expect faster ROI within 6 to 11 months, and they're way more confident about scaling. About two-thirds have established some form of AI governance. Now, the ones who are succeeding are the ones who are integrating it into their existing data governance and not creating a whole separate program. And that makes sense when you think about what governance does. It's back to managed data quality, lineage, usage, and access policies.
So, what's the reality of AI readiness across the enterprise? And also, does it differ by things like company size or region or industry?
So it was a really interesting survey result set. We based it on over 500 senior data and analytics leaders, but they're all from large enterprises across the US and Europe. We're not talking about startup experimentation. This is really enterprise scale reality. And here's the test I use when people ask me if they're really ready. Do you have production SLAs on your models? Do you have defined owners for model drift? Do you have KPI dashboards tied to model outcomes? And if the answer to any of those is no, then their confidence is outpacing reality. And that gap will cost you. AI readiness isn't about experimentation. Experimentation is easy. Readiness is about repeatability. And repeatability requires data quality measurements, governance processes, monitoring, cross-functional accountability. And most organizations have one or two of those, but very few have all four.
Right. And of course, data really seems to be the key. And so, what's your perspective on the current state of data infrastructure as well in enterprises today?
I would say infrastructure isn't the problem that it used to be. It's much more of a human capability problem now. So we're back to the study again. 87% say their infrastructure is ready, but still half cite it as a challenge. And so that gap isn't platform or models. It's skills. It's people. What organizations need are integrated skill sets. And so what that data engineers, platform engineers, machine learning engineers, governance architects, and people who can translate the business needs for those users. And this is for us, so it's a full stack capability problem, not just a single role. And one other thing, AI has changed the infrastructure conversation because now AI can act autonomously. That means the data environment itself has to be observed, governed, and continuously monitored. That's not just a pipeline problem anymore. It's a full-on environment operating problem.
So, what's the kind of roadmap? How do you get it right?
Focus in on back on the basics. It's into the governance. It's into lineage. It's making data integrity a key company critical capability. I would say that there's three gaps that are coming out of that specifically. First is in organizations, there's the governance gap. 62% say they lack data governance, and it's the primary challenge holding back their AI initiatives. And that's not a marginal issue. That's the number one thing. And the second is the quality measurement gap. 29% of leaders say their biggest challenge is just measuring quality. You can't pay down a debt you can't quantify. So they're stuck. But the third one is what we call this agentic AI data integrity gap, the gap between where enterprise data is today and what's actually required to safely power agentic AI at scale. And there, only 12% of organizations report having data that's good enough quality and accessible enough for AI. And that's a massive gap.
True, true, true. So, what specific data integrity gaps remain? Like, what's the kind of framework people have to build, and what should they solve for?
They should solve for data. I mean, the poor data used to call small issues that humans could fix. You could see it in a dashboard, you could footnote it on a slide, and explain it away. Now it creates compounding risk. And so that's bias and drift and compliance exposure. And especially when autonomous agents act on bad data, you don't just get a wrong report, you get a wrong decision that propagates at machine speed.
True, and that is where things get dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, if you had to advise a business kind of starting out on this, so how do businesses solve for these very critical gaps, especially the data integrity gaps?
Yeah, it's not another platform or even another program. It's really creating an integrated data integrity operating model. So what does that mean? It means unifying quality, governance, context, observability, and business alignment into one repeatable way of working. AI readiness isn't something you buy off the shelf. It's something you earn through consistency. And so there's some concrete pillars I'd point out. The first is you have to break down the silos. You need to integrate your data across all of your sources, make it accessible, fresh, and interoperable. We've started to create with this sort of SaaS-based world more data silos because each of the applications maintains their own independent data model. Bringing that together and making that operable for AI is critical because agentic AI relies on those continuous feedback loops. So if your data's locked in silos, the agents can't learn. The second is establish governance that produces automation, not documents. Policies need to reside in code, not in slides. So when governance lives in your pipelines, your quality checks, your lineage tracking, your privacy enforcement baked into your continuous integration, continuous delivery, teams move faster. And then the third is think about enhancing quality continuously. Data observability with automated alerting, anomaly detection, schema drift monitoring. You have to treat quality as an operating condition, not as a one-time gate you pass through before a project launches.
True, true. And could you kind of break it down for me? What's the human role in this versus, the AI and agentic AI role in this?
Yeah, the humans are helping to provide the semantic layer on top of the data. So how do you understand and articulate the value that's in your data stores or even the meaning of that particular data? So one of the ways that I look at this, because folks say, is semantic layer a new capability to the organization? It's something we've had for decades. We built it previously into your applications in the way that the data was formed on the screen, or even into your BI layer, to the filters, to the widgets that were being displayed on the dashboard. And that had its own natural semantic layer. Now we're sort of unlocking this and we're saying I can throw AI at the data, but we have to give it that same kind of context. You can't just let it run raw on the data. And I think that's really where this human interpretation layer needs to come back. We need to build out these semantic models so that AI can have the same interpretive layer that our people know that are baked into our AI models.
So coming back to data governance, what are a few data governance best practices that you would recommend as like this is essential for businesses?
Right. I want to come back and reframe governance because too often I hear it described as a break on innovation. And I think that framing is wrong. The sort of iron fist of data governance. Governance shouldn't be friction, it's traction. And it's what lets you move faster with confidence. So, down to three practices on this. The first is extend your existing model, don't duplicate it. The highest performing organizations extended their existing data governance to cover AI. They didn't create a separate AI governance program. 40% of the top performers did exactly this. So if you separate out the functions, you create fragmentation, and you end up with conflicting definitions of trust. And the second, and you heard me hit this a couple of times now, make governance automation, automated controls. They scale. Documents don't. So these quality checks have to be embedded in the pipelines and lineage and privacy enforcement. And third, you need to operationalize accountability. Governance tells you where your data come from and who touched it, whether it has PII, what its quality score is. Without that, you're not doing AI. You're doing very expensive guesswork.
And that, when billions of dollars are at stake, is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about, the quality of the data actually. So how can organizations really prove and provide the highest quality data for their AI implementations? That could be agentic, it could be LLMs, anything.
Yeah, you have to treat quality as a control and not as a cleanup task. The organizations that are getting ahead of this aren't treating data quality as something you do once before a project launches. They're investing in observability, automated alerting, anomaly detection, schema drift monitoring, and that way quality becomes a dynamic, continuous capability. That's a big shift. It's from quality as a launch event to quality as an operating condition. And for agentic AI specifically, this becomes foundational. It's not optional. AI has to act on data that's accurate and continuously monitored. And if you're not doing that, you're introducing risk at every decision point.
Yeah. So what are the skills that the human layer now needs to actually do all of this to make sure that AI has that high quality data, the governance in place, all of that?
Well, it's interesting because it's not a talent shortage in one area. It's really a distributed problem. The research shows that the shortages were across the board. 30% say they can't deploy AI at scale. 29% lack the expertise in responsible AI and compliance. 28% struggle to translate business needs into AI solutions. So there's no single hire that fixes this. What you need are people who can operate across the data and business strategy and AI governance simultaneously. So those are data engineers and platform engineers and governance architects. But you also need those domain translators that can speak the business language and interpret that and be able to bring that into your AI solutions. That's a whole stack that needs to operate as a cohesive team. Dr. Anand from Drexel LeBow stated this. He said the skills gap has major implications on how organizations and universities prepare people entering the workforce for an era of agentic AI. So this isn't just an enterprise problem, it's a full-on ecosystem problem.
It seems to be a very interesting space to build a long-term career as well, where your skills will be required, like no matter what.
It should probably come as no surprise when you're talking to a chief data officer that that person believes that data is integral to the operation and valuation of the company. I think that the ability for talent that understands data and is able to explain that and articulate that in real business terms and to sort of unlock that value to AI becomes incredibly valuable in this next generation of agentic development.
Yes, absolutely. And how do you see this role developing as well? Like in say 2 or 3 years, I don't think we can see further than that. Maybe what's the most interesting thing this role can do?
Well, I think it's really looking at the different context of data that sits across the organization. So we start to fragment out into more and more of these SaaS applications or cloud applications where the individual application has its own context, but we now want this sort of interoperability. So the applications which used to have all the functions built within them, we're now opening that up to the capability of a model to talk to that as a data store, not necessarily in the function of the application itself. So my CRM system, I may be talking to that from an agentic model where I say, tell me about my customer. What cases have they opened up recently? How have they interacted with me in this other system? And so the building that fabric, the sort of data fabric across the organizations, going to become a critical need.
Wow. That I think someone coming out of university would probably really want to go in that direction, the STEM students especially.
And so the challenge is back to the universities. And it's interesting is we're hiring in for our internship program. And the questions that I often ask to the incoming students are, well, what are you studying at university? And I still hear some, sort of legacy thought processes in there. They're not teaching agentic thinking yet in the university or how to interact with models or be able to build your own prompts. I'm hearing things like, discussing R and they're discussing Python as a set of skills. And I agree that data manipulation is important, But being able to formulate this sort of prompt-driven world is where we need our universities to focus on building the next generation of talent.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's happening on the job right now, though.
It is. And it's one of the things that we across our organization, we deploy agentic capabilities in almost every area and expect our employees to sort of lean in and adopt those. So as we got deploying out Copilot, for example, as a capability of the organization, we're looking at the utilization of that tool, where we have pools of adoption and where we have resistance to adopting new agentic processes.
And how are you overcoming the resistance or,
It comes back to trying to understand what the trust issues are that the employees are having with the tools and where they feel that they can do a better job than the agent, or that they haven't learned how to build agentic capabilities for themselves, writing their own agents, building out their own set of prompts. And so that is, if you look at across the organization, it's a partnership between our IT organization and our human resources organization as we're challenging and developing talent within Precisely.
Yes. And do you see, the future being, just the collaboration between humans and agentic AI? Is that the way forward?
It has to be. And we have to look at this in that it's going to change how knowledge workers are interacting with data. And so you start to think about what questions could I be asking, and even what processes can I automate that I would have previously had to manually be processing. And so the same people that we're now working with, whether it's in our revenue teams, in our support organizations, in our marketing organizations, having them rethink their job from the tasks that they do to the outcomes they can achieve.
That's actually a very interesting picture of the future, one that moves away from the doom and gloom into, what are the possibilities?
Well, I like to say that we can help to take drudgery off people's plates. So look at those tasks where there's really no value add from the person. They're, in some cases I call them data donkeys. They're carrying data from one place to the other, and they're not really adding any value to that. They're not really making any decisions. They're performing a task that doesn't need to necessarily have a human performing that. That frees them up to do the higher level tasks. So if we can build the assembly of the sets of insights that they want to work with, now they're up to the next level, which is how do I make decisions based on the input that I'm getting rather than the work product to get there. We sort of laugh about this when we talked about data scientists over the last decade. And 80% of a data scientist's work is in data preparation. And 20% is really doing the actual data science. That same ratio exists in almost every knowledge worker's function. That 80% is sort of the plumbing and the engineering of it, and the 20% is the value add. If we can invert those percentages, how much more effective and how much more fulfilled can you be in your daily job?
Exactly. So it does seem like human potential also is growing along with AI, which is amazing.
I think so.
Very interesting. So let's talk about businesses and ROI. So how can business really get the best out of its AI investments? How can it ensure that AI delivers measurable value?
I think this comes down to three things. The first of define success before you start. Write that press release for what this is going to do. And that's not going to be in tech metrics like model accuracy or query volume. You have to define that a business outcome, the cost avoided, the revenue influenced, the labor hours reclaimed. And if you can't articulate that business outcome, you're not ready to scale. The second is resist the pilot trap. Pilots and proof of concepts are safe. They're controlled. But production is where the value is created and where your data quality and governance work either holds together or falls apart. Too many organizations stay in this sort of pilot purgatory because they're afraid to test the foundation. And then third, build that integrated data integrity operating model. It's not a program, it's not a platform. It's a repeatable operating model that ties together quality, governance, context, observability, skills, and that business alignment.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the model? Because that sounds very interesting.
So, and I'll sort of tie back and also the POCs because those two things tie together. As we're working and you're doing the experimentation, you build out your POC. You have a hypothesis about how this is going to be used. We've seen this with a number of agents that we've built where the design team comes together and says, this agent is built to do a very specific task. When we start to do that rollout, we apply an exponential rollout, start the build out slow, watch the results are coming to this. This comes back to that integrated data integrity operating model. How do you monitor what's going on with the sets of inputs to this? And often you find out that the users had no concept about what your thoughts were in developing the agent. They have their very own context for how they want to be able to use that. And so now that's where you need to be able to have the monitoring and the capability for observability. You're matching that back with interpreting what the business use is, the governance and context of that data. That is where the data integrity operating model meets the AI rollout. And so those two things have to roll together because candidly, this is no plan survives contact with the enemy. I also say that happens in AI as well. No agent survives as it rolls out in the way that you intended it to happen. And even simple things in the model, like you watch the inputs that come in. One of the ones that I saw this week was somebody asked the agent that we rolled out to tell them a joke. Like that was nowhere in the prompts that we were expecting to see. And so that's back to observability, governance, and ensuring that the model is performing with quality.
Okay. And was the model able to actually come up with a joke?
It was a dad joke. I have to admit, it was not very funny.
Well, I guess we have to train the model up then.
Exactly.
That was really interesting. Tell us, what are your final takeaways for our audience? In this very kind of perilous but very full of potential space that we are in right now. What should anybody listening in take away?
If I leave you with one thing, it's this. If we're serious about agentic AI in this year and beyond, data integrity has to become a risk control and not a back office cleanup. The organizations that internalize will be the ones with something real to show for their AI investments. Confidence without measurement is just optimism. So build the foundation and earn the readiness.
Okay, so confidence and optimism together.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you for a brilliant conversation, Dave. And thank you for appearing on Enterprise Unlocked.
Thank you, Radhika.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening in and keep watching. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast. Please do follow us on social media and subscribe for more ideas and insights. Until next time.